Have you ever sat at a family dinner and suddenly become the villain without knowing the crime? That night, my billionaire grandfather slammed his hand on the table, shouting my name like a verdict. The scariest part was not the noise, but the way my family looked at me, like they had been waiting for this. When a stranger in a suit placed a leather briefcase on the table, I realized this was no longer Thanksgiving. It was a trial. My name is Mara Whitlock, and if you looked at my resume, you would see a very ordinary life laid out in 12-point font. I am 34 years old. I work as an operations specialist at Northbridge Civic Solutions, a mid-level corporate job where I spend my days staring at spreadsheets and managing logistics for municipal projects that most people ignore. I drive a sedan that is 6 years old. I rent a one-bedroom apartment that smells faintly of damp wood whenever it rains, and I pay my bills on time. I am the definition of average. I am the person you pass in the grocery store aisle without glancing twice, but sitting here tonight, in the cavernous dining room of my grandfather's estate in Cedar Hollow, Vermont, I did not feel average. I felt like a prey animal that had wandered into a den of wolves wearing silk and cashmere. The air in the room was stifling, heavy with the scent of roasted sage, rosemary, and the expensive beeswax candles flickering in the center of the mahogany table. It was Thanksgiving, the one night of the year when the Whitlock family pretended to be a cohesive unit. My grandfather, Harlan Whitlock, sat at the head of the table. To the outside world, he was a billionaire industrialist, a man of iron will and charitable headlines. To us, he was the sun around which we were forced to orbit, hoping for a little bit of warmth, but usually only getting burned. The atmosphere was warm, but it was a warmth that felt staged, like a movie set where the fire in the hearth is gas-controlled and the laughter is scripted. My mother was to my left, picking at her green beans with a surgical precision that suggested she was terrified of making a sound. My father was drinking his wine a little too quickly. Across from me sat my Aunt Lorraine and my cousins, who were currently discussing a ski trip to Aspen that cost more than my entire annual salary. They smiled at me, but their smiles never reached their eyes. It was the polite, condescending smile one gives to the help or to a distant relative who has not quite made something of themselves. I kept my head down, focusing on cutting my turkey. I just wanted to get through the night. I wanted to finish this meal, endure the brandy and cigars in the library where I would stand awkwardly in the corner, and then drive back to my quiet, small life. I told myself that I was lucky to be here. I told myself that family was family, no matter how cold the room felt. And then, the sound of a palm slamming against the wood shattered the illusion. It was a violent, sharp crack that made the crystal wine glasses jump. The conversation about Aspen died instantly. Forks froze mid-air. The silence that followed was so absolute it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I looked up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Harlan was standing. He was 82 years old, but in that moment, he looked like a titan carved from granite. His face was not flushed with the red heat of temper. It was pale, drawn tight with a cold, terrifying disappointment, and he was looking directly at me. "Mara," he said. His voice was not a shout, but it projected with a force that vibrated through the floorboards. "Explain yourself, right now." I blinked, my mind racing to find purchase on a slippery slope. What had I done? Had I used the wrong fork? Had I forgotten a birthday? Had I said something offensive in the 5 sentences I had spoken all evening? I stammered, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the grand room. "I don't understand. Grandfather, explain what?" "Do not play the fool with me," Harlan snapped, his eyes narrowing. "Not tonight. Not after what I found. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me why you did it." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I looked around the table, desperate for an ally. Surely my parents would jump in. Surely they would ask him to calm down, to explain what was going on. I looked at my mother. She was staring intently at the linen tablecloth, her knuckles white as she gripped her napkin. She did not look at me. I looked at my father. He was swirling the last dregs of wine in his glass, his gaze fixed on the red liquid as if it held the secrets of the universe. He did not look at me either. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the Vermont winter started at the base of my spine. They were not confused. They were avoiding my eyes. I turned my head to look across the table. Aunt Lorraine was sitting perfectly still. She was not looking at the table. She was looking at her son, my cousin, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of communication pass between them. It was a micro-expression, a tightening of the lips, a slight nod. It was the look of people who knew the script and were waiting for the next line to be delivered. They knew. Everyone at this table knew something that I did not. "Grandfather," I said, my voice gaining a little more strength, fueled by a sudden, rising panic. "I swear to you, I have no idea about it. Whatever you think I did, I didn't do it. I don't even know what we are talking about." Harlan stared at me for 5 long seconds. I expected him to yell again. I expected him to throw a plate, but he didn't. He slowly sank back into his chair, and the look he gave me was worse than anger. It was a look of total, crushing betrayal. It was the look of a man who had finally decided that I was exactly what everyone else said I was. A disappointment.
"You have no idea," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You sit there, eating my food, under my roof, and tell me you have no idea."
"I don't," I insisted, my hands trembling. "Then why," Harlan said, cutting through my defense like a blade, "is your name all over the paperwork?" Before I could answer, before I could process the absurdity of his question, the heavy double doors of the dining room opened. The sound of the latch clicking was loud in the silence. We all turned. Standing in the doorway was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that was too formal for a family holiday, and he carried a sleek black leather briefcase. He did not look like a guest. He looked like an executioner who had arrived to read a warrant. He stepped into the room, the heels of his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. He did not smile. He did not wish us a happy Thanksgiving. He walked straight to the end of the table, near Harlan, and placed the briefcase on the empty space beside the turkey platter. "I apologize for the interruption," the stranger said, his tone devoid of apology. "But Harlan, you were right. This could not wait until Monday." My father finally looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. "Now, hold on," he started, his voice cracking. "Is this really necessary? It is a holiday." "It stopped being a holiday 10 minutes ago," Harlan said, not taking his eyes off me. He gestured to the lawyer. "Open it." I sat frozen in my chair. The warmth of the room had vanished, replaced by a sterile, freezing dread. I looked at the briefcase. It was just an object, but it felt like a bomb. I realized then that the staged warmth of the dinner had been a trap. They had all been waiting. My parents, my aunt, my cousins. They had been eating turkey and passing the gravy while waiting for the moment the trap would spring. But the most terrifying part was the confusion swirling in my own head. Harlan had said my name was on the paperwork. What paperwork? I owned nothing. I controlled nothing. My life was a series of rental agreements and monthly budget spreadsheets. I had never signed anything more important than a car lease. The lawyer clicked the latches of the briefcase. Snap, snap. The sound echoed like gunshots. I looked at Aunt Lorraine again. She was sipping her wine now, her eyes watching me over the rim of the glass. There was no pity in her gaze. There was only a cold calculation. She wasn't afraid of what was in the briefcase. She was afraid of what I might say once it was opened. "Whatever is in there," I whispered, mostly to myself. "It isn't mine." Harlan heard me. He leaned forward, his face bathed in the flickering candlelight, looking every bit the judge at my sentencing. "We are about to find out, Mara, because according to this, you have been a very busy young woman for the last 3 years." 3 years. The phrase hit me hard. 3 years ago, I was struggling to pay off my student loans. 3 years ago, I was working 2 jobs. 3 years ago, I was nobody. The lawyer pulled a thick stack of documents from the leather case and set them down on the white tablecloth. The paper was heavy. Legal bond, The header was obscured from my view, but I could see signatures, dozens of them. This is not a dinner anymore, I thought, my stomach churning with nausea. This is a trial. And as the lawyer pushed the papers toward the center of the table, I realized with a sickening jolt that I was the only one in the room without a defense attorney. Something had been built in my name, a castle or a prison, and I had been living in its shadow without ever knowing it existed. Harlan pointed a manicured finger at the stack of documents that now sat between the untouched cranberry sauce and the cooling gravy. His finger did not tremble. It was steady, accusatory, and aimed directly at the center of the table, as if marking the site of a crime. 3 years ago, my grandfather began, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in my chest. I made a decision to diversify some of my holdings. I purchased a substantial piece of residential real estate. It was not for me. I have enough houses I do not live in. It was intended as a safety net, a hard asset that would appreciate over time, something that could not be easily liquidated or foolishly spent. And I put that asset in the name of the one person in this family I thought needed the most protection. He looked at me. I put it in your name, Mara. My fork clattered onto my plate, the sound sharp and intrusive. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, trying to process the sheer impossibility of his words. My name? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Grandfather, that is impossible. Is it? He challenged. Yes, it is, I said, my voice rising as the absurdity of the situation hit me. 3 years ago? 3 years ago, I was living in a basement apartment with a roommate who stole my yogurt. 3 years ago, I was driving a Honda that shook every time I went over 50 miles per hour because I could not afford the $600 to fix the alignment. I was eating instant noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. I looked around the room, desperate for someone to acknowledge reality. I was drowning in student loan payments. If I owned a piece of real estate, do you think I would have been borrowing rent money from Jules? My mother suddenly cleared her throat. It was a loud, desperate sound. She reached for her wine glass, her bracelets jingling nervously. Harlan, really, she said, her voice high and tight. It is Thanksgiving. Let us not discuss finances at the dinner table. It is vulgar. Mara does not need to be grilled about business matters she clearly does not understand. She does not understand because you ensured she would not understand. Harlan shot back, not even looking at her. He kept his eyes locked on mine. I did not tell you about the property, Mara, because I was advised against it. I was told that the burden of such an asset would be too much for you. Advised? I repeated. The word felt slippery. Advised by whom? Harlan gestured vaguely to the left side of the table, where my parents sat like statues carved from gilt. Your parents, and your aunt, they came to me, concerned. They told me you were going through a difficult episode. They used specific words. They said you were emotionally unstable, that you were fragile, that giving you control over something of this magnitude would be dangerous, perhaps even reckless. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Emotionally unstable. The phrase landed on me like a physical blow. It was not just an insult. It was a key that suddenly unlocked a dozen confusing memories from the last few years. Memories I had filed away under bad luck or personal failure. My mind raced back to 2 years ago. I had applied for a beautiful loft apartment downtown. It was a stretch for my budget, but I had the savings. I had a perfect rental history. Then, the property manager had called me, sounding awkward and apologetic, telling me my application was denied due to risk factors flagged during the background check. I had never understood what those factors were. Then there was the job at the logistics firm in Boston. It was a senior role, a 50% pay bump. I had nailed 3 rounds of interviews. The hiring manager had practically told me the offer letter was in the mail. Then, silence. When I finally got a hold of HR, they gave me a vague, scripted excuse about internal restructuring and concerns about long-term fit. I looked at my mother. She was refusing to meet my gaze, intensely interested in the pattern of the lace tablecloth. That is why I could not get the loan for my car, I said. the realization dawning on me with horror. The bank officer said there was a note on my file, a flag on my credit report regarding capacity to manage debt. I thought it was a mistake. It was not a mistake, Harlan said grimly. I was told you were having breakdowns, that you were erratic. So, I agreed to a compromise. I would buy the property, but I would assign temporary guardianship of the asset to the family to manage on your behalf until you were well again. I was never sick, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. I have never had a breakdown. I go to work, I pay my taxes, I walk my dog. I am the most boringly stable person in this entire family. Oh, Mara, honey, Aunt Lorraine chimed in from across the table. Her voice was dripping with that sickly sweet concern she used when she wanted to cut you down. She leaned forward, placing a hand on her chest. You know you have always been sensitive. You take things so hard. Remember when you didn't get into that sorority? You cried for days. We just wanted to make sure you didn't have too much pressure on your plate. It was an act of love. An act of love? I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. You told the world I was crazy so you could control something that belonged to me? Sit down, Mara, my father hissed. You are making a scene. I am not making a scene, Dad, I said, looking down at him. I am making sense, finally. I looked back at Harlan. He was watching me, and for the first time, I saw the fog lifting from his eyes. He saw it too. He saw the anger in my posture, and he realized it was not the anger of an unstable woman. It was the righteous anger of a victim. If I was the owner on paper, I said, my voice steadying, but I didn't know about it, and I didn't sign for it. Then who did? The question hung in the air. Who has been making decisions for me for 3 years? I demanded. Who signed the closing documents? Who has been managing the taxes? Who has been receiving the mail? Silence. My cousin looked at his plate. My mother took a large gulp of wine. My father clenched his jaw so hard I could see the muscle feathering in his cheek. They were not going to answer. Their silence was a confession. They had not just stolen money or property, they had stolen my agency. They had painted a caricature of me, a weeping, broken, incompetent girl, and sold it to my grandfather and the world so they could keep their hands on whatever was in that briefcase. Harlan did not wait for them to speak. He had heard enough silence to know exactly what it meant. He turned to the man in the charcoal suit. Graham, Harlan said, his voice cold as steel. Place the evidence on the table. Open everything. Let us see exactly how my granddaughter has been protected all these years. The lawyer nodded once. He reached for the clasp of the briefcase again, and as he began to pull out the files, I knew there was no going back. The family dinner was dead. The autopsy was about to begin. Graham Pike did not care about the roast turkey. He did not care about the antique porcelain or the fact that he was ruining a holiday. With a swift, practiced motion, he pushed the silver gravy boat aside, creating a sterile clearing on the white tablecloth right in front of me. He fanned out the documents like a dealer laying down a royal flush in a high-stakes poker game. These were not just papers. They were weapons. This is the deed, Graham said, his voice flat and clinical. For a waterfront estate at Larkspur Lake in New Hampshire. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, private dock, purchased 3 years ago for $2.4 million, cash. I stared at the glossy photograph attached to the front page. It was a house made of glass and cedar, perched on the edge of a pristine blue lake. It was the kind of place I had seen in magazines, the kind of place where people wore white linen and drank iced tea on wraparound porches. It was beautiful, and it was completely alien to me. I have never been to New Hampshire, I said, my voice sounding hollow. I have never even seen this house. Look at the owner of record, Graham commanded, tapping the line with his index finger. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. There, in bold, black letters, was my name, Mara Whitlock. Seeing it there felt like a violation, as if someone had stolen my identity and used it to live a life I was not invited to. But then my eyes drifted down to the bottom of the page. to the signature line. The breath hitched in my throat. There was a signature there. It read, Mara Whitlock, written in a sweeping, elegant cursive with loop-de-loops on the L and a flourishing cross on the T. I looked up at Graham, then at my grandfather. That is not my signature. My father, who had been sweating through his collar since the briefcase appeared, jumped in too quickly. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to control the narrative that was rapidly spiraling out of his hands. Now wait a minute, he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the paper. Memories can be fuzzy. It was 3 years ago. Maybe she just forgot. She would remember if she signed it, but maybe she was not herself that day. Graham turned his head slowly to look at my father. The movement was predatory. Precisely, Mr. Whitlock. She would remember, because nobody forgets buying a multi-million-dollar mansion. And yet, she does not. Which brings us to the handwriting analysis. Graham pulled another sheet from the stack. This signature has a slant of 45 degrees. Mara's signature, based on her employment contracts and tax returns we pulled, has a slant of 10 degrees. The pressure points are different. The loop structure is different. This is not just a forgotten signature. This is a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. The word forgery hung over the table like a guillotine blade. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, pressing a napkin to her mouth. But that is not the most interesting part, Graham continued, ignoring my mother's distress. He flipped the page, revealing a timestamp encoded in the footer of the document. These transfer documents, they look old. They are dated 3 years ago, but if you look at the digital metadata from the county clerk's office, which I took the liberty of accessing this morning, you will see something curious. He pointed to a string of numbers. This document was not generated 3 years ago. It was modified and refiled only 6 months ago. Someone went into the system to clean up the paper trail. My mind was reeling. 6 months ago. That was around the time I had asked my parents for a small loan to fix my car's transmission, and they had told me money was tight and that I needed to be more responsible. At the exact moment they were lecturing me on responsibility, someone was busy doctoring legal files for a mansion that supposedly belonged to me. Why? I asked, looking at my Aunt Lorraine. She was staring at the centerpiece, her face the color of old ash. Why would you do this? Just to keep the house in my name? Not to keep it, Graham said, delivering the next blow. To get rid of it. He slapped the final document onto the table. It was thinner, a simple transfer of deed. 6 months ago, Graham announced, his voice ringing with finality. The property at Larkspur Lake was transferred out of Mara Whitlock's name. It was sold. Sold? Harlan repeated, his voice low and dangerous. For how much? Graham looked directly at Aunt Lorraine. For $1. I felt the blood drain from my face. $1? It is a standard tactic for hiding assets or moving them between family members to avoid taxes or scrutiny, Graham explained. A quitclaim deed, you, Mara Whitlock, apparently woke up one morning 6 months ago and decided to gift a $2 million asset to a new owner for the price of a vending machine soda. I looked at the name of the new owner on the document. It was an LLC I had never heard of. Blue Heron Holdings. Who is Blue Heron Holdings? I whispered. Graham did not answer me. He looked at Aunt Lorraine. Lorraine flinched. She tried to compose herself, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. She picked up her wine glass, but her hand was shaking so badly that red wine sloshed over the rim and stained the white cloth. Oh, for heaven's sake, Lorraine said, her voice shrill and brittle. It is just paperwork. It must be a clerical error. You know how these lawyers are. Harlan, they mix things up. We can fix it on Monday. There is no need to ruin the turkey over a typo. A typo? Harlan asked. He was not shouting. He was staring at her with a look of absolute revulsion. You sell my granddaughter's inheritance for $1 and call it a typo? I looked around the table. My father was studying his shoes. My mother was weeping silently, but they were tears of fear, not remorse. My cousins were checking their phones under the table, terrified to make eye contact with anyone. And suddenly, I realized something that made me feel colder than the snow falling outside. They were terrified, but they were not looking at me. They were not afraid of my anger. They were not afraid of the betrayal they had inflicted on me. They did not even see me as a threat. I was just the object, the signature, the name on the paper. They were looking at Graham Pike. They were looking at Harlan. They were afraid of the money being cut off. They were afraid of the law. I was invisible to them. Even now, as the victim of a multi-million-dollar fraud, I was just a ghost in the room. Harlan slowly placed his hands on the table. He looked from the forged signature to the $1 sale price, and then he looked at me. His eyes were filled with a sorrow so deep it looked like physical pain. "I thought I was protecting you," he said softly to me, before turning his gaze back to his children. "But I was wrong. I was just giving you the weapons to kill her future." He picked up the document where my name had been signed by a stranger's hand. "You did not just steal a house," Harlan said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You stole her voice. You used her name to write a lie, and you let her live in poverty while you played Monopoly with her life. Someone used this girl's name to rewrite the truth, and I want to know exactly who held the pen." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, consuming the oxygen in the room just as my family had consumed my life. The silence that followed Graham's revelation was different from the silence before. It was not the quiet of shock. It was the quiet of a puzzle finally clicking into place. For the last 30 minutes, I had been confused. But now, as I looked at the faces of the people who raised me, the confusion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My mind began to rewind, replaying the last 3 years of my life not as a series of unfortunate events, but as a coordinated campaign. I thought about the time I applied for a modest credit card to cover a dental emergency. I had a decent job, no debt, and a perfect payment history. Yet, the rejection letter had arrived 3 days later, citing insufficient credit history and debt-to-income ratio. I had cried in my car, wondering how I could be working 60 hours a week and still look like a liability on paper. "The job at the architectural firm," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried like a shout. 2 years ago, I was the final candidate. The hiring manager called me to discuss start dates. She was excited. I was excited. And then, the next morning, I got an automated email saying the position had been put on hold. I looked at my mother. She was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, avoiding my gaze. "It wasn't put on hold, was it?" I asked. I called that company back a month later to check in. The receptionist told me they had filled the role. She sounded confused when I gave my name. She said, "Oh, I thought you withdrew your application due to personal health reasons." My mother stiffened. "I didn't withdraw," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Someone withdrew for me. Someone told them I was sick. Someone told them I was unstable." Graham Pike cleared his throat. He did not look up from his file. "It goes deeper than job offers. Miss Whitlock, when your grandfather purchased the Larkspur property, he did not just sign over the deed. He established a maintenance fund, a direct deposit of $4,000 a month, intended to cover property taxes, utilities, and general upkeep. It was meant to ensure the house never became a financial burden to you. $4,000 a month. I felt physically ill. That was more than my entire monthly take-home pay. For 3 years, I had been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner to save money for a new winter coat, while $4,000 a month was being funneled. Where? Where did the money go? I asked. "Into a joint custody account," Graham answered. "Managed by your parents, with your Aunt Lorraine listed as a secondary signatory." My mother let out a sob. It was a theatrical, practice sound, the kind she used when a waiter brought her the wrong salad dressing. "We were just holding it. We were managing it until you were ready. We didn't spend it on ourselves. We were building a nest egg for the family." "Ready?" I repeated. "Ready for what? I am 34 years old. I have been paying my own rent since I was 22. When exactly was I going to be ready to access my own money? We were managing it temporarily, she cried, reaching out as if to touch my hand. I pulled back. Temporary? I looked at her, truly looked at her. 3 years is not temporary. Mom, 3 years is a lifestyle. 3 years is the difference between me living my life and me just surviving it. Harlan slammed his hand on the table again, making my mother jump. Stop lying. Janet, you told me she was having episodes. You told me she was practically catatonic with depression. You said, Harlan, don't give her the money directly. She will just give it away or lose it. And I believed you. He turned his gaze to my father, who was now drinking water with a shaking hand. You told me she was unstable, yet she was stable enough to be the owner of record for a tax shelter. She was stable enough to have her credit score ruined so you could leverage assets in her name. She was stable enough to be your scapegoat. We were protecting her, Aunt Lorraine snapped, her patience finally snapping. She glared at me across the centerpiece. Look at her, Harlan. She is a mouse. She works a dead-end job. She drives a piece of junk. She doesn't know the first thing about wealth management. If you had given her that house 3 years ago, the taxes alone would have crushed her. We took the burden. We handled the paperwork. She should be grateful we didn't drag her into the mess of it. Grateful? The word tasted like bile in my mouth. I stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy, but my spine felt steel straight. You call this protection? I asked, looking Lorraine in the eye. You sabotaged my job application so I wouldn't have enough income to be independent. You ruined my credit so I couldn't move away. You kept me poor. You kept me small. You didn't do that to protect me from the world. You did it to protect yourselves from me leaving. That is not true. My cousin, the one who had been whispering with Lorraine earlier, blurted out, We agreed that it was safer if everyone stayed close. If you got that job in Boston, you would have left. And then who would sign the... He stopped. The room went deadly quiet. He bit his lip, his eyes widening as he realized what he had just done. Who would sign the what? I asked, my voice deadly calm. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Who would sign the papers? I finished for him. Who would be the dummy corporation? Who would be the warm body you could pin the liabilities on? It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the $4,000 a month. It was about the narrative. They needed me to be the failure. As long as I was the unstable one, the fragile one, the one who couldn't get a good job or a nice apartment, they were the heroes. They were the benevolent caretakers of the poor. Broken Mara. If I succeeded, if I became independent, their excuse for controlling my assets would vanish. My success was a direct threat to their theft. You didn't just steal my money, I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of pure, distilled fury. You stole my confidence. I spent 3 years thinking I wasn't good enough. I thought I didn't get the job because I wasn't smart enough. I thought I didn't get the apartment because I wasn't successful enough. I sat in my room and wondered what was wrong with me. I looked at my father. I asked you for advice, remember? When I didn't get that promotion, I came to you and cried, and you patted my back and said, Some people just aren't cut out for the corporate ladder. Honey, maybe you should aim lower. You comforted me for a failure you engineered. My father couldn't look at me. He stared at the tablecloth as if wishing the pattern would swallow him whole. That is the cruelest part, Harlan said softly. The money can be repaid, the house can be recovered, but making a young woman doubt her own sanity? Making her believe she is broken just so you can pick her pockets? Harlan turned to Graham. Show them the rest. I want them to see that I know everything. Graham nodded and reached into the briefcase for the next file. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. I didn't know what was coming next, but looking at the terror in my aunt's eyes, I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. I wasn't the mouse anymore. The trap had snapped, but I wasn't the one caught in it. The revelation about the money had been a physical blow, a sharp punch to the gut that left me breathless. But what happened next was not a punch. It was a slow, deliberate incision into the very fabric of my childhood, severing the last thread of trust I held for the people sitting around me. Harlan leaned back in his chair. The fire in the hearth cracked, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, but the warmth did not reach the table. My grandfather looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. The Titan made of granite was showing hairline fractures. He looked at me, not with the scrutiny of a billionaire assessing an asset, but with the confusion of an old man who had lost his way in the dark. "Mara," he said softly. His voice was terrifyingly gentle compared to the thunder of his earlier accusations. "Forget the deed. Forget the trust fund for a moment. I need to ask you something personal. Something just between you and me." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Did you receive my letters?" he asked. I blinked, the question catching me completely off guard. "Letters?" I repeated. "You mean the Christmas card? The one with the printed signature from your office?" Harlan frowned. The lines on his forehead deepened. "No, not the holiday form letters. I am talking about the personal letters, the handwritten ones. I sent one every single month for the last 3 years. I included them in the package with the maintenance checks." I stared at him. The room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. "Grandfather," I said, my voice shaking, "I have never received a handwritten letter from you. Not in 3 years. Not ever." Across the table, my mother made a sound. It was a sharp intake of breath, like a seal breaking on a vacuum-packed jar. I looked at her. Her face, which had been flushed with wine and indignation earlier, was now the color of paste. This was not the reaction of someone caught stealing money. This was the reaction of someone caught stealing a soul. She knew that the money was a crime of greed. But this was a crime of cruelty. Graham Pike reached into his briefcase again. He did not slam these papers down. He placed them gently on the table, sliding a single sheet toward me. It was a photocopy. "We kept copies," Graham said quietly. "Your grandfather insisted on it. He wanted a record of his correspondence in case your condition worsened and you needed reminding of his support." I picked up the paper. My hands were trembling so violently that the words danced before my eyes. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Harlan's jagged, forceful script. "My dearest Mara, I hope the autumn leaves are beautiful at the lake this year. I know you are struggling, but please remember that solitude can be a teacher. I was happy to hear from your mother that you are finally taking those painting classes. I always knew you had an artist's eye. Do not worry about the cost of supplies. Simply let me know what you need. I love you, and I'm waiting for the day you are ready to visit me again. Love, Grandfather." I read the words twice, then a third time. "Painting classes?" I whispered, tears hot and fast, blurring my vision. "I have never taken a painting class in my life. I don't live at a lake. I live in an apartment complex behind a gas station." I looked up at Harlan. "I never got this. I never got any of them." Harlan closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "I wrote to you every month, asking how you were, asking if the house was comfortable, asking if you needed more help. And every month, I received a reply from your mother." He turned his gaze slowly, agonizingly, to his daughter. "You told me she read them," Harlan said to my mother. His voice was barely audible, yet it carried the weight of a death sentence. "You told me she wept over them. You told me she was too emotional to write back herself. So she dictated her responses to you. You told me she was grateful." She was not well," my mother stammered. Her voice was thin, reedy. She looked at my father for help, but he was staring at the chandelier as if praying for it to fall and crush us all. "We didn't want to upset her. Harlan, you know how intense you can be. We thought direct contact would add pressure. We were filtering it, for her own good." "Filtering?" I asked. The word came out as a sob. "You call this filtering? You erased him from my life." The memories came flooding back, crashing over me like a tidal wave. I remembered all the times I had asked about Grandfather, all the times I had suggested we visit him. Flashback. 2 years ago, Thanksgiving, I was sitting in my parents' kitchen. watching my mother stir the cranberry sauce. "Mom, I should call Grandpa Harlan," I had said. "I haven't spoken to him in months. It feels rude." My mother hadn't even turned around. "No, Mara, don't bother him. He's very busy with the merger. Besides, he is disappointed in you right now. You know how he feels about your lack of career progress. It is better to let him cool off. I will send him your love." 1 year ago, my birthday. "Did Grandpa send a card?" I asked. My mother sighed, giving me a pitying look. "Oh, honey, you know he is forgetful. And honestly, with the way you have been acting lately, so anxious, so overwhelmed, he probably thinks you need space. He asked us to handle things for now." End flashback. "You told me he didn't want to talk to me," I said, looking at my mother with horror. "You told me he was disappointed in me. You told me I was a burden to him." "And you told me," Harlan interrupted, looking at my parents, "that she was too ashamed to speak to me. You told me she was angry that I hadn't given her the money directly. You painted a picture of a spoiled, resentful, broken child." The realization settled over the table like a shroud. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the $4,000. It was about isolation. To steal the money, they had to sever the relationship. They had to make sure I never called him, never visited him, never compared notes. They had to keep us in separate worlds. "You made me think he didn't love me," I said, my voice cracking. "So you could cash a check." "We did it for the family," Aunt Lorraine suddenly interjected. She slammed her wine glass down, sloshing red liquid onto her hand. She didn't wipe it off. "Stop looking at us like we are monsters. We did what we had to do. The business was struggling. Your father made some bad investments. We needed the liquidity. Harlan, you have so much. You never miss it. And Mara didn't need a mansion. She needed stability. We were going to pay it back, eventually." "Eventually?" Harlan repeated. "When? When she was 40? When I was dead?" "Lorraine, stop," my father hissed. "No, I won't stop," Lorraine shouted. Her facade of the elegant socialite was melting away, revealing the desperate, greedy woman underneath. "Look at what you are doing. Harlan, it is Thanksgiving. We are family. You are going to destroy everything over some unread letters and a house nobody was using? Don't make this a tragedy. It is a misunderstanding." The room went silent. A tragedy, a misunderstanding. I looked at the photocopy of the letter in my hand. "I love you, and I'm waiting for the day you are ready to visit me again." I slowly folded the paper. I creased the edge with my thumbnail, sharp and precise. "A misunderstanding is when you buy the wrong kind of wine," I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was cold. It was the voice of the woman Harlan Whitlock had thought was hidden inside me all along. I looked at Lorraine. I looked at my parents. "You stole 3 years of my life," I said. "You stole the relationship with my grandfather. You stole my financial future. You stole my belief in myself. You let me think I was crazy. You let me think I was unlovable." I stood up straight, smoothing the napkin on the table. "I am not making this a tragedy. Lorraine," I said. "I am just the last person in this room who is finally allowed to know what kind of movie I have been living in. And spoiler alert, the victim wakes up at the end." Harlan looked at me. For the first time that night, for the first time in years, I saw pride in his eyes. He saw it too. The fog of lies they had pumped between us was clearing, and he could finally see his granddaughter standing on the other side. "Graham," Harlan said, his voice hard as iron, "give me the rest of the file, all of it. If they lied about the letters, they lied about everything. I want to know exactly how deep this rot goes." My mother put her head in her hands and began to weep, but this time, nobody offered her a tissue. The sound of her crying was not the sound of a victim. It was the sound of a gambler who had bet everything on a lie and had just watched the house win. Graham Pike was not finished. He stood by the table, a sentinel in a charcoal suit, and reached into the depths of his briefcase once more. The room was heavy with the silence of exposed lies, but he was about to add a new weight to the scale. He pulled out a sleek black folder, distinct from the property deeds and bank statements. This one looked different. It looked like a dossier. "We have discussed the assets," Graham said, his voice cutting through the thick tension. "We have discussed the stolen correspondence, but there was still a piece of the puzzle that did not fit. Why was Mara so vulnerable? Why was she in a position where she needed your financial protection in the first place?" He looked at me. "You are intelligent, Miss Whitlock. You have a degree, you have skills. Yet, for the last 3 years, your career has stalled while your peers advanced. We found that curious. So, my firm ran a digital forensic audit on your professional footprint." My father looked up, his face flushed and sweaty. "What does that mean? Her job has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," Graham corrected. He opened the black folder. "It turns out, your daughter's bad luck in the job market was not bad luck at all. It was a calculated demolition." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of an email. "This," Graham pointed, "is a communication sent to the hiring director at Sterling Ridge Compliance 2 years ago. That was the position you interviewed for. Correct. Mara? The one that would have doubled your salary?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, I was a finalist. Then they ghosted me." "They did not ghost you," Graham said. "They received this." I looked at the email. The subject line read, "Confidential personnel concern. Candidate Whitlock." The body of the email was short but devastating. It claimed to be from a concerned family representative acting under medical advisories. It stated that while I was talented, I was currently undergoing intensive treatment for stress-induced volatility, and that placing me in a high-pressure role would be negligent to my recovery. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Volatility?" I whispered. "I have never missed a day of work in my life." "There are more," Graham said, sliding another sheet. "This one was sent to the mortgage underwriter when you tried to buy that small condo in the city. And this one," he slid a third, "was sent to the credit bureau, flagging your identity as compromised to trigger automatic freezes." My father stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "That is a lie. We would never do that. We wanted to manage the money, yes, but we would never sabotage her career. We are her parents, for God's sake. We want her to succeed." "Do you?" I asked. My voice was dry, cracking like dead leaves. "Because the result looks exactly the same. Dad, I didn't get the job. I didn't get the loan. I stayed poor. I stayed desperate. And because I was desperate, I didn't ask questions when you told me you were handling things." "We didn't send those," my father shouted, looking frantically at my mother. "Janet, tell them, we didn't do this part." My mother was shaking her head, her eyes wide with panic. "We didn't. I swear on my life. Harlan, we just wanted to control the trust fund. We didn't touch her job." "Then who did?" Harlan asked, his voice low and dangerous. Graham flipped a page in his dossier. "Technology leaves footprints. Mr. Whitlock, these emails were sent from an anonymous account, but the recovery address linked to it was quite specific. It belongs to a private server managed within this very estate." He looked directly at Aunt Lorraine. Lorraine was not drinking wine anymore. She was gripping the stem of the glass so hard I thought it would shatter. Her face was a mask of cold, haughty indignation. "Lorraine?" Harlan asked. The single word hung in the air like an accusation. Lorraine scoffed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, please, don't look at me like that. Someone had to be the realist in this family." "Realist?" I asked, feeling a cold fury rising in my chest. "You told my potential employers I was crazy?" "I told them you were fragile," Lorraine snapped. "And look at you. You were barely keeping it together. If you had gotten that big job in Boston or New York, you would have moved away. You would have been out of reach." "Out of reach of what?" I demanded. "Out of reach of your control?" "Out of the family," she yelled back. "We needed you here. If you moved away and became some big-shot executive, you would have hired your own accountants. You would have looked at your own taxes. You would have found the Larkspur deed in 5 minutes." The room went deadly silent. She realized what she had said a second too late. She clamped her mouth shut, her eyes darting to Harlan, then to Graham. "So," Harlan said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you destroyed her career to keep her close enough to rob." "It wasn't destruction," Lorraine muttered, looking down at her plate. "It was just a few clicks, just a few emails to keep her static, to keep her safe. We were going to make it up to her later." "Just a few clicks," I repeated. The banality of evil was sitting right there, wearing diamond earrings. "You traded my future for your comfort. You knew that if I was successful, I would be dangerous. So you kept me failing. You engineered my failure." I looked at the timestamps Graham had highlighted. "June 12th, I read aloud. "That was the day I got the rejection from the bank. I came to your house that night. Lorraine, I was crying. I felt so hopeless. And you poured me tea and told me that maybe the universe was telling me to slow down." I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "The universe wasn't telling me anything. You were the universe." "It is effectively a digital prison," Graham noted, looking at Harlan. "They built a wall around her professional life, so she had no choice but to remain dependent on the family structure. It is not protection, sir. It is containment." Harlan looked at his daughter, Lorraine, as if he was seeing a stranger. He looked at the woman he had raised, the woman he had trusted, and he saw the monster she had become. "You didn't just want the money," Harlan said, his voice thick with disgust. "You wanted power. You wanted to play God with her life. You decided she was unstable so you could make it true. You broke her legs and then criticized the way she walked." I did it for us," Lorraine hissed, her eyes wet with angry tears. "For the family. We were drowning. Dad, you were so focused on your philanthropy and your legacy. You didn't see that we were struggling. We needed the Larkspur asset to leverage the loans for the business." "So you ate your own young," Harlan said. He did not yell. He stated it as a fact of nature. "You cannibalized your niece's life to feed your own incompetence." I looked at my parents. My father was pale, staring at Lorraine with a mixture of shock and relief that the blame had shifted, but I knew he was complicit. He might not have sent the emails, but he had benefited from the result. He had watched me fail and done nothing. "I used to wonder," I said quietly, speaking to the room at large. "I used to wonder why I felt so stuck, why it felt like every time I climbed a rung on the ladder, it broke under my feet. I thought I was cursed." I looked at Lorraine, then at my parents. "But it wasn't a curse," I said. "It was a cage. You built a cage out of concern and protection and locked me inside. And the worst part? You made me thank you for it." Graham closed the black folder with a soft thud. "The damage to a reputation is difficult to quantify," the lawyer said. "But in a court of law, we call it tortious interference. And unlike the property theft, which is financial, this is personal. This shows malice." Harlan turned to me. "Mara, did you know any of this?" "No," I said. "But it makes perfect sense. The silence, the rejections, the way everyone treated me like I was made of glass. You didn't think I was fragile because I was weak. You needed me to be fragile so you could be strong." I stood there, feeling the weight of the last 3 years lift off my shoulders. I wasn't incompetent. I wasn't unhireable. I wasn't unstable. I was just the target of a very expensive, very intimate conspiracy. "You sold my name for a house," I said to Lorraine. "And you sold my dignity for, what, convenience?" Lorraine didn't answer. She just picked up her fork and stabbed a piece of cold turkey, as if pretending the dinner could continue would make the nightmare go away. But the dinner was over, the trial was in full session, and the verdict was written on Harlan's face. Graham Pike cleared his throat, a sound that by now acted like a prelude to a disaster. He adjusted his cuffs, his expression unreadable, and looked from the dossier of my ruined career to the deed of the house I supposedly owned. "There is a practical matter we must address regarding the Larkspur Lake estate," Graham said, his voice even. "When we discuss recovering the asset, we are not just talking about filing paperwork at the county clerk's office. We are talking about eviction." The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. "Eviction?" I asked, frowning. I thought you said it was a vacation home. Is there a caretaker living there? Graham shook his head slowly. The property is not vacant. Mara, it is fully occupied. It has been a primary residence for the last 8 months. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. Someone was living in my house. Someone was sleeping in the bedrooms I had never seen. Cooking in the kitchen I technically owned, looking out at the lake view that belonged to me. Who? I asked. The single word came out sharp, like a piece of broken glass. Who is living in my house? Graham did not answer me directly. Instead, he turned his head and fixed his gaze on Aunt Lorraine. It was a look of professional disdain so potent it could have peeled paint. Perhaps Mrs. Shaw would like to explain, Graham said. I followed his gaze. Lorraine was pale, her lipstick looking like a garish wound on her white face. She picked up her napkin and dabbed at her upper lip, avoiding my eyes. It is complicated, she mumbled. It is not complicated at all, Graham corrected. The current occupant of the property is Arthur Shaw. My jaw dropped. Arthur Shaw, my aunt's new husband, the man she had married last year in a lavish ceremony that I had not been invited to because, as my mother had put it, it was an intimate affair, and they didn't want me to feel overwhelmed by the crowd. Arthur? I repeated, the absurdity of it almost making me laugh. Uncle Arthur is living in my house? He believes it is their house, Graham clarified. When the property was transferred to Blue Heron Holdings for $1, Arthur was led to believe that this was a legitimate family asset being gifted to Lorraine as part of an estate planning restructuring. He has no idea he is trespassing on stolen property. He thinks he is the lord of the manor. I looked at Lorraine. She shrank back in her chair. So, I said, my voice trembling with rage, you didn't just steal the deed to hide the money. You stole the house to live in it. You are playing house in my home while I scrape together rent for a 1-bedroom apartment with faulty heating. I have to live too, Lorraine suddenly shrieked. The sound was piercing, desperate. She slammed her hand on the table. Arthur and I needed a place. The condo in the city was too small, and after the wedding, we needed a fresh start. The house was just sitting there. Mara, empty, collecting dust. It was a waste. Why shouldn't family use it? Use it? Harlan cut in. His voice was a low rumble of thunder. You call this using? You are living like a queen in a castle built on your niece's stolen future? You are drinking coffee on a deck that she paid for with her reputation? I didn't steal it, Lorraine cried, tears streaming down her face now, ruining her makeup. We were going to pay her back, eventually. Arthur is investing in the renovations. We are adding value. You are adding insult to injury, Harlan snapped. Then, the cracks in the alliance began to show. The pressure in the room had become too great, and the united front of my family shattered. It was not my idea to let them move in, my father shouted suddenly, pointing an accusing finger at Lorraine. I told her it was risky. I told her that if Arthur started getting mail there, it would create a paper trail. Oh, shut up, Gordon, my mother yelled, turning on her husband. You are only saying that because you are scared. You were perfectly happy when Lorraine offered to split the rental income with us before Arthur moved in. The room went dead silent. I looked at my mother. Rental income? My mother froze. She realized she had said too much. Her hand flew to her mouth, but the words were already out, hovering over the table like toxic smoke. What rental income? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Graham answered for her. He pulled a spreadsheet from the bottom of the stack. Before Mr. Shaw took up residence, the lawyer said, the property was listed on high-end vacation rental sites for 2 years. During the peak seasons, summer and ski season, it generated substantial revenue. He ran his finger down a column of numbers. $3,000 a week, sometimes $4,000 during holidays. The total revenue generated over the last 2 years is just under $150,000. I felt the room spin. $150,000. While I was skipping meals to save $20, while I was driving a car with a check engine light I couldn't afford to diagnose. while I was shivering in my apartment because I was too afraid to turn up the thermostat. They were collecting rent on my house. Where did that money go? I asked. I didn't need to ask. I knew. It went into the general family fund, my father muttered, defeated, to pay for the club memberships, the cars, the upkeep on this house, and the payments to the consultant who sabotaged her job, Graham added dryly. That was an expense. After all, I looked at them, my parents, my aunt, people I had spent my whole life trying to please, people I had spent my whole life feeling inferior to. They weren't better than me. They were parasites. They had fed off my instability like leeches. They had taken a house that was supposed to be my safety net and turned it into their piggy bank. And then they had moved into it. He doesn't know? I asked, looking at Lorraine. Arthur doesn't know the house belongs to me? No, Lorraine whispered. He thinks you are just the poor cousin. He thinks we help you out of charity. Charity. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that made my father flinch. You took my house, I said. You took the rental money. You took the maintenance fund, and then you let your husband believe that I am the charity case? We didn't want him to worry, Lorraine sobbed. You didn't want him to know you are a thief, I corrected. I looked at the lawyer. Graham, what happens now? We file for an immediate injunction, Graham said. We freeze the assets. We notify Mr. Shaw that the title he believes he holds is invalid due to fraud, and we begin the process of forensic accounting to recover every cent of the rental income and the trust fund. Arthur will leave me, Lorraine wailed. If he finds out I lied about the house, he will divorce me. Then you should have thought about that before you moved him into a crime scene, Harlan said without an ounce of pity. My parents were arguing in harsh whispers now. You said it was safe, my mother hissed at my father. You said Harlan never checks the small accounts. You were the one who wanted the new kitchen, my father shot back. Where did you think the money came from? Janet? Thin air? I watched them. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They were no longer the giants of my childhood. They were just greedy, frightened people scrambling to save themselves. I didn't feel the need to scream. I didn't feel the need to flip the table or throw the wine. The anger had crystallized into something much harder, something diamond sharp. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip. Then I set it down with a deliberate clink that silenced their bickering. Stop fighting, I said. They looked at me. For the first time, they were waiting for me to speak. It doesn't matter whose idea it was, I said. It doesn't matter who signed the check and who spent the cash. You are all on the ledger now. I leaned forward. I am not going to ask you for an apology. I am not going to ask you why you did it, because I don't care. I looked at my father, then my mother, then Lorraine. From this moment on, I said, my voice steady and cold as the winter wind outside. This is not a family dinner. It is an audit, and everything you took, every month of rent, every maintenance check, every opportunity I lost because you decided I was unstable, it is going to be counted. I paused, letting the weight of the promise settle on them. I want every single dollar back, I said. And I don't care if you have to sell the cars, or the club memberships, or the jewelry you are wearing right now to pay me. You are going to settle the tab. The silence that followed was total. My mother looked at her diamond bracelet as if it were suddenly made of lead. They realized then that the daughter they had kept poor was about to become the most expensive creditor they had ever known. Grandfather, I said. It was not a question. It was a request for the floor. Harlan did not look at my mother, who was still weeping into her hands, or at Lorraine, who was staring blankly at the wall as if disassociating from reality. He looked only at me. He gave a single, sharp nod. Speak, Harlan said. Nobody interrupts her. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. For the first time in 34 years, I did not feel the urge to shrink. I did not feel the need to apologize for taking up space. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. For the last 3 years, I began, my voice steady, I have walked around with a heavy weight in my chest. I thought I was broken. I thought I was weak. I looked directly at my mother. She flinched, but she did not look up. I thought I was incapable of handling the real world. I continued, because that is what you told me. Every time I struggled, you didn't offer help. You offered a diagnosis. You told me I was sensitive. You told me I was easily overwhelmed. You told me that the world was too hard for someone like me, and that I should just be grateful to have a safe place to land. I walked slowly around the table. The clicking of my heels on the hardwood was the only sound in the room. But I wasn't overwhelmed, I said, stopping behind my father's chair. I was sabotaged. It is easy to look incompetent when the people supposed to spot you are actually cutting the safety rope. I looked at the faces around the table, my cousins, my aunt, my parents. They looked like strangers to me now. The mask of family had slipped, revealing a syndicate of selfish, frightened people. You used specific words, I said, analyzing them like a clinician. For your own good. We are just looking out for you. That was the language you used to groom me into accepting poverty. You needed me to believe I was a failure so that you wouldn't feel guilty about stealing my success. I turned to Lorraine. She was still trying to maintain some shred of dignity, sitting upright, though her face was ash gray. I have a few questions, I said, and I want answers, not the family version, the truth. I leaned in close to her. Who signed the deed? Lorraine? Was it you? Did you practice my signature on a notepad before you committed a felony, or did you just wing it? Lorraine pressed her lips together. She didn't answer. Who transferred the funds? I asked, shifting my gaze to my father. Who logged into the bank account? Who typed in the routing number for the maintenance fund that went into your pocket? Was it you, Dad? Or did you make Mom do it so your hands would look clean? My father wiped sweat from his upper lip. Mara, please. It is not that simple. Who sent the emails? I asked, raising my voice just a fraction. Who sat at a computer and wrote to Sterling Ridge Compliance that I was mentally unstable? Who hit send on the message that killed my career? I looked at my cousin, Kevin. He was sitting 2 seats down from Lorraine, looking like he might vomit. He had always been the nervous one, the one who followed orders. Kevin, I said. He jumped. You are IT support for the family business, I said. You set up the servers. You manage the accounts. I didn't send them, Kevin blurted out, his voice cracking. I swear, Mara, I just set up the private email account. I didn't write the messages. But you knew, I said. Kevin looked at Lorraine, then at Harlan, terrified. I saw Aunt Lorraine with the file once, in the office, about 2 years ago. She was stressing out about the dates on the transfer documents. Shut up, Kevin, Lorraine hissed. No, Kevin stammered, panic taking over. I am not going to jail for this. She told me she had to get the paperwork filed before the old man changes his mind. She said if Harlan found out Mara was doing well, he might give her the money directly, and then we would lose the liquidity for the ski lodge renovation. The ski lodge, another piece of the puzzle. They weren't just paying bills, they were funding luxuries. So that is it, I said, nodding slowly. You were betting against me. You needed me to fail so you could afford a renovation. My father stood up then, his hands shaking as he reached out toward me. Mara, listen, we can fix this. We can settle this. We don't need lawyers. We don't need audits. We can handle this in the house. We are family. We can work out a payment plan. I will sell the boat. Lorraine can sell the condo. We will make you whole. In the house? I repeated. I looked at the opulent dining room, the high ceilings, the expensive art on the walls. In the house is where you hid it. Dad, I said. In the house is where you lied to me every single day for 3 years. You want to keep it in the house because out there, in the real world, what you did has a name. It is called fraud. It is called embezzlement. I took a step back, putting distance between us. I am not playing by your rules anymore, I said, because your rules are rigged. If we keep it in the house, you will just find another way to manipulate me. You will cry. You will guilt trip me. You will tell me I'm destroying the family. I am done listening to that story." I turned to Harlan. My grandfather stood up. He walked over to where I was standing. He didn't say a word to my parents. He simply placed his heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of solidarity that screamed louder than any shout. He was physically aligning himself with me. It was him and me against them. "She is right," Harlan said. His voice was deep and final. "The time for family discussions is over." He looked at Graham Pike. "Graham, what is our position?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "We have the confession regarding the forged signature. We have the witness testimony regarding the intent to deceive from your nephew. We have the digital footprint of the tortious interference with her employment. It is more than enough. Sir, I can file for an emergency asset freeze tomorrow morning. We will petition for a full forensic audit of every account that has touched the Whitlock Family Trust in the last 5 years." My mother let out a low moan. A 5-year audit would likely uncover things even Harlan didn't know about yet. "Do it," Harlan said. "But there is one more thing," Graham said, pausing for effect. He looked around the table, his eyes landing on each family member with a cold, predatory gleam. "You all seem surprised that Mr. Whitlock brought me here tonight. You seem to think this was a sudden discovery." My father looked up, confusion mixing with his fear. "Wasn't it?" Graham smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Whitlock did not just stumble upon a deed last week. He has had suspicions for 6 months, ever since Mara missed his birthday call, which she never does. He started to wonder why the communication was so one-sided." I looked at Harlan. He squeezed my shoulder gently. "I hired a private investigator 4 months ago." Harlan revealed. "We didn't intervene immediately because we needed to see the extent of the network. We needed to know who was involved. We have been monitoring the bank transfers. We have been archiving the emails." The color drained from every face at the table. You were watching us?" Lorraine whispered. "So," Graham concluded, closing his briefcase with a sharp snap, "when you lie to the police or the auditors next week, I suggest you remember that we already have the tapes. We are not looking for the truth. We already have it. We are just waiting to see if you have the decency to admit it." I looked at my family. They were paralyzed. They realized now that the dinner hadn't been a negotiation. It hadn't even been an interrogation. It had been a notification of sentencing. I took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the air in my lungs didn't feel heavy. "Dinner is over," I said. "I suggest you call your lawyers. You are going to need them." Harlan did not shout. He did not throw his wineglass against the fireplace. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his dinner jacket and produced a heavy gold fountain pen. He uncapped it with a deliberate, metallic click that sounded like the cocking of a gun. "Graham," Harlan said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The papers." Graham Pike was ready. He didn't need to dig through the briefcase this time. He had a separate folder, red and urgent, sitting right on top. He slid it onto the table in front of my grandfather. "These are the emergency injunctive relief orders," Graham explained to the room, though his eyes were fixed on the paper, "and the directives for the bank. Once Harlan signs these, the freeze is immediate. Every account linked to the Whitlock Family Trust, every subsidiary account, and every personal account that has received a transfer from the trust in the last 36 months will be locked. You will not be able to withdraw a cent. You will not be able to transfer a stock. You will not even be able to use your debit cards at the gas station." My mother gasped, her hands flying to her throat. "Harlan, you can't. It is the weekend. We have bills. We have obligations." "So did Mara," Harlan said, signing his name with a flourish. The scratch of the nib on the paper was loud and final. "And you left her to handle them while you spent her money." He signed the second page, then the third, with every signature. I saw the color drain further from Aunt Lorraine's face. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was watching her lifestyle evaporate in real time. "Now regarding the recovery strategy," Graham continued, acting as if the weeping woman and the pale men at the table were merely furniture. He turned to me. Step 1 is the property. We will file the motion to void the transfer to Blue Heron Holdings on the grounds of fraud and forgery. The deed will revert to you. Mara, Mr. and Mrs. Shaw will be served with an eviction notice giving them 72 hours to vacate the premises. 72 hours? Lorraine choked out. That is illegal. We have rights. You are squatters in a home obtained through a felony. Graham corrected her calmly. You have no rights. And frankly, if you push the timeline, we will push the criminal charges. I suggest you start packing. Step 2, Graham went on, is the disgorgement of profits. We will calculate the total rental income generated by the property, plus statutory interest. We will also calculate the total amount of the maintenance stipend diverted to your parents' accounts. We spent it, my father cried, his voice cracking. It is gone. Harlan, the renovations, the club fees, the market has been down. We don't have that kind of cash sitting around to pay her back. Then we will liquidate your assets, Graham said simply. The lake house you actually own, the cars, the portfolios, whatever it takes to make the victim whole. That is how the law works. Mr. Whitlock, you don't get to keep the proceeds of a theft just because you already spent them. My mother stood up then, trembling. She walked around the table, not toward Harlan, but toward me. She reached out, her eyes pleading, looking for the daughter she thought she could still manipulate. Mara, please, she begged, her voice wet with tears. Look at what you are doing. You are destroying us. You are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can earn more money, but we are getting old. If you take everything, how will we survive? Don't destroy this family over money. Please. It was a masterclass in guilt. For a second, the old reflex kicked in. The urge to soothe her, to fix it, to make myself smaller so she could be comfortable. But then I looked at the dossier on the table, the emails, the lies, the 3 years of silence. I didn't step back. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. I am not destroying the family. Mom, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and clear. You destroyed it the day you decided I was a resource to be mined instead of a person to be loved. I am not destroying anything. I am just resigning from my position as your victim. You ungrateful little... Aunt Lorraine started, her face twisting into a snarl. She stood up, knocking her chair over. We kept a roof over your head for years. We got you through college. And this is how you repay us? By bankrupting us? She pointed a shaking finger at me. You think you have won? You think because you have Harlan's ear tonight, you are safe? I know people, Mara. I know the board members at Northbridge Civic Solutions. I play tennis with the wife of your CEO. One phone call. That is all it takes. I will tell them exactly how unstable you really are. I will tell them you sued your own family. You will be toxic. You will never work in this town again. It was a terrifying threat, or it would have been yesterday. I looked at Graham. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. He tapped the screen of the tablet that had been sitting silently next to his briefcase for the last hour. Mrs. Shaw, Graham said, his voice dropping an octave. I'm glad you said that, because up until 10 seconds ago, our case for tortious interference was based on historical emails. It was strong, but circumstantial. But now? He turned the tablet around. The screen showed a waveform, recording in real time. Now we have a direct verbal threat of extortion and defamation made in the presence of legal counsel and witnesses. Graham said, You just handed us the nail for the coffin. If you make that phone call, or any phone call about Mara, you will not just be sued. You will be arrested for witness intimidation. Lorraine froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the tablet, then at Graham, realizing she had walked directly into a trap. Harlan stood up. He looked at the group of people he had called family for decades. He looked at their greed, their fear, and their absolute lack of remorse. There will be one more change, Harlan announced. The room went silent. I am instructing Graham to draft a new codicil to the Whitlock Family Trust tonight. My father looked up, his eyes wide. "Dad, wait." "The current structure divides the estate equally among my children," Harlan said. "That structure is hereby dissolved. Any beneficiary who is found to have participated in the fraud against Mara Whitlock, either by direct action or by silent complicity, will be removed from the trust permanently." "You can't do that," Lorraine screamed. "That is our inheritance. We are your blood." "And she is your blood," Harlan roared, slamming his hand on the table for the final time. "She is your blood, and you bled her dry. You think being my child gives you the right to eat your own kin?" "She is nothing," Lorraine shrieked, losing all control. The mask was fully off now, revealing the ugly, raw entitlement underneath. "Without us, she is nothing. She is a mousy little nobody who couldn't manage a lemonade stand, let alone a fortune. We were the ones who kept the name meaningful. We deserve that money. She is just a mistake." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. Lorraine panted, her chest heaving, realizing too late that she had said the quiet part out loud. She had said the thing they all secretly believed, that I was less than them, that I didn't matter. Harlan stared at her. His expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold, like a door slamming shut in winter. "A mistake," Harlan repeated softly. He looked at me. He saw the woman standing tall, the woman who had uncovered a conspiracy, the woman who had refused to back down. Then he looked at Lorraine, sobbing in her designer dress over money she hadn't earned. "The only mistake I made," Harlan said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "was thinking that my legacy was safe in your hands." He turned to Graham. "Cut them off, all of them, effective immediately. They can keep what they have in their personal pockets. But not a single dime more comes from me. Not now. Not when I die." "Dad," my father wailed. "It is done," Harlan said. I looked at them. They were devastated. Not because they had lost me, not because they had hurt me, but because the tap had run dry. I realized then that I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to seek revenge in the dark or play dirty games. I didn't need to ruin their reputations. They had done it all themselves. All I had done was turn on the lights. "The audit begins on Monday at 9 in the morning, I said, picking up my purse. "I suggest you spend the weekend finding receipts instead of excuses." I turned to walk away, leaving the dinner untouched, the wine undrunk, and the family unmade. The room was trembling with the aftershocks of Harlan's decree. My Aunt Lorraine was sobbing into a linen napkin, mourning her bank account rather than her morality. My father was slumped in his chair, a man defeated by his own cowardice. It felt like the end. But Graham Pike had not closed his briefcase. He remained standing, his hand resting on a final thin manila envelope. "There is a common misconception in this room," Graham said, his voice slicing through the sound of Lorraine's weeping. "You are all operating under the assumption that Mrs. Shaw, your Aunt Lorraine, was the mastermind. You assume she was the architect because she was the loudest, and because she moved into the house." He looked at Lorraine, who looked up, eyes red and swollen. "But Mrs. Shaw is, with all due respect, not sophisticated enough to engineer the psychological dismantling of a human being," Graham stated coldly. "She is merely a thief. The person who designed the cage Mara has been living in is someone else entirely." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We traced the payments," Graham said. "Not just the rent money, but the fees paid to the third-party service that sent those emails to your employers. The entity that flagged your credit. The entity that created the medical advisories regarding your mental health." He opened the envelope. The payments did not come from Lorraine. They came from a discretionary fund managed by a family consultant, a crisis manager, usually hired to clean up scandals for politicians. His name is Silas Vance. "I don't know a Silas Vance," I said. "No," Graham said, "but your mother does." I turned slowly to face my mother. She was not crying anymore. She was sitting perfectly still, her face a mask of terrifying neutrality. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "Janet?" Harlan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It was necessary," my mother said, Her voice was steady, chillingly practical. We had leveraged the business too far. Dad, we had debt, massive debt from those tech investments Gordon made 5 years ago. We were underwater. We needed a shield. A shield? I asked, feeling a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the temperature. I am your daughter. How am I a shield? If you were successful, my mother said, looking at me with eyes that were devoid of love, you would be independent. You would ask questions. You would want to see the books. But if you were troubled, if you were unstable, then we could put assets in your name to hide them from creditors, and you would never know. We could assign high-risk liabilities to your credit profile, and if the defaults happened, they would hit you, not us. We needed you to be the fall guy. Mara. We needed a safe harbor for our mistakes. The brutality of it took my breath away. Lorraine had wanted a house. My father had wanted cash. But my mother? She had wanted a human sacrifice. She had kept me poor, kept me anxious, and kept me failing, just so she could have a place to dump their toxic financial waste. You hired a professional, I said, my voice shaking with the realization. You hired a professional hitman to assassinate my character. I hired a reputation manager to protect the family assets, she corrected, as if that made it noble. Harlan looked at his daughter. He looked as if he had been shot in the chest. You didn't protect the family, Harlan said. You ate it. You turned your own child into a ghost so you could hide your incompetence. Harlan turned to Graham. Is it done? The filings were submitted electronically 20 minutes ago, Graham confirmed. We have filed civil suits for fraud, embezzlement, and intentional infliction of emotional distress against all parties. Furthermore, the evidence regarding the forgery and the identity theft has been forwarded to the district attorney's office. This is no longer a civil dispute. Janet, it is a criminal investigation. There is no turning back. My mother finally flinched. The mask cracked. Harlan, you would send your own daughter to prison? No, Harlan said, turning his back on her. You sent yourself there when you decided my granddaughter was disposable. He looked at the table, at the cooling turkey, the congealed gravy, the untouched wine, the trappings of a holiday that had been nothing but a lie for 3 years. From this moment forward, Harlan announced to the room, no one at this table is to contact Mara directly, not a phone call, not a text, not a letter. If you have something to say to her, you will say it to Mr. Pike. Mara will be assigned a separate security detail and an independent legal team, paid for by me, to ensure that none of you ever steal so much as a postage stamp from her again. My father started to sob, a pathetic, heaving sound. We are ruined. You were ruined a long time ago, I said. You just finally got the bill. I stood up. I looked at the people who had raised me. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, who had hired a stranger to ensure I never succeeded. I waited for the anger to consume me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt light. I felt unburdened. The heavy coat of failure they had forced me to wear had been stripped away, and I was finally standing in my own skin. I spent 3 years wondering what was wrong with me, I said quietly. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering why I couldn't get it right, why I couldn't be the daughter you wanted. I paused, looking my mother in the eye. I lived as a failure because you needed me to fail, I said. But the show is canceled. Mom, I quit. Harlan stepped forward. He ignored his weeping children and walked right up to me. He took my hands in his. His grip was warm and strong. Mara, he said, and his voice cracked with emotion. I am sorry. I do not apologize for them. I apologize for myself. I let them isolate you. I believed the lie because it was easier than looking for the truth. I failed you, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone again. Thank you, grandfather, I whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. It was an old, heavy iron key. This is not for the lake house, he said. The lawyers will handle that. This is for my townhouse in the city. It is empty. It is yours. Go there. Sleep in a bed that you own. Order room service. Start painting again. Start living. I took the key. It felt heavy and real in my hand. It felt like freedom. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I didn't look at Lorraine. There was nothing left to say. They were already ghosts, fading into the background of a life I was leaving behind. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the floor, a steady, rhythmic sound of departure. I walked through the heavy oak doors and out into the crisp, cold Vermont air. The snow was falling softly, covering the driveway in a blanket of white, erasing the footprints of the past. Behind me, the Thanksgiving dinner sat on the table, cold and dead. The candles would burn down to the wicks, the food would spoil, the tradition was over. But as I started my car and drove through the gates, watching the estate disappear in my rearview mirror, I knew one thing for certain, that Thanksgiving didn't destroy me, it liberated me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on my family's dinner from hell. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear the truth. See you in the next story.